We are the Medical Society Consortium on Climate and Health, a coalition of doctors and health professionals mobilizing support for climate solutions that will protect and promote health, equity, and resilience for all Americans.
Realize how this is really a unifying concept for public health, primary care, general medicine, emergency medicine, and disaster medicine.
It's now, it's urgent, and we got to alert everyone at home. We got to alert everyone in the community. We got to alert our politicians.
And if we all contribute just a little bit, it makes a big difference.
Here at Midway Christian Church, creation care is a part of how we live our faith. Protecting God's creation means protecting our brothers and sisters everywhere. We all deserve clean air, clean water, and a thriving world around us. It's by coming together that we can do extraordinary, positive things for our children, our congregation, and our community, and create a healthier, safer climate and a more equitable world for ourselves and future generations. At Midway Christian Church, we're living out a legacy of love. Won't you join us at the table?
As members of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, we are called to be God's hands in the world. Whether it's caring for our neighbors, protecting our children, or seeking justice for the most vulnerable among us, it's our duty to go out in the world and change it for the better. Get involved with ELCA's creation care programs. Talk about climate change with your families, friends, colleagues, and local congregations, and inspire others to do what they can to protect our climate and this world that we call home. Please join us.
The American Psychological Association is pleased to sponsor the American Climate Leadership Summit. As psychologists, we study how people think and communicate about climate change. We help individuals and communities to reshape their climate-related behavior, and we respond to the mental health impacts of climate change. We are committed to helping people everywhere have a healthy and sustainable environment.
I want to thank Lisa, Ann, Bronson, and Matt for showing us a future that is possible. I really started envisioning a lovely, verdant, lovely future for ourselves and our children, and it really inspired me to work even harder to secure it. We also sent a poll out to see what you believe you can bring to your community, what solutions that they talked about today are most relevant. 12% said protecting forests, wetlands, and other natural places. 16% of you said preserving, protecting, and harnessing the power of our oceans and coastlines. 19% said collaborating with farmers to bring forward innovative agricultural solutions. And well over half of you said all of the above. So it's great to see that we all can be part of the solution. It can be national and it can be local. And there's so much we can do right in our own cities, even if we live in an urban environment. So I really appreciated them addressing that as well. So now that we know the solutions we can work towards, we're going to focus on how we get to that future in ways that are inclusive, just, and equitable. On the first day of the American Climate Leadership Summit, we had an eye-opening discussion about climate injustice and environmental racism in America. We shared experiences. information and stories about how disproportionate numbers of people of color in America are suffering from the impacts of climate change, environmental toxins, fossil fuel production, insufficient safeguards, and so many more injustices rooted in centuries of structural racism. Today, we're going to talk about solutions. So to join and to talk about that, please welcome Vanessa Hauc, Eco America board member and senior correspondent for Noticias Telemundo, in conversation with Carlton Waterhouse and James Woodley on how we can get on a path to a just and equitable climate future now.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Maggie. And welcome to one of our most important sessions of the day and really of our summit, Getting to a Just Future, Addressing Climate Disparities. I'm Vanessa Hauc, Eco America board member, and also I'm a news anchor for Noticias Telemundo. And joining me today are Mr. Carlton Waterhouse from Howard University and also Mr. James Woodley from the U.S. Climate Action Network. So welcome to both of you. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Vanessa.
Thank you, Vanessa.
Thank you. As Megan noted on the first day of the American Climate Leadership Summit, we talk about how climate injustice and environmental racism is impacting us in America. We hear about the nature of these injustices and also firsthand stories of Black, Brown, and Indigenous people. We are impacted firsthand and worse not only by our climate crisis, but also by fossil fuel production, inequality, inadequate access to health and education, pandemic, economic hardship, deep structural racism, and much more. Today, we're going to talk about ways to move forward and dismantle our disparities and get us to a just and equitable climate future. So let's jump in. To start, let's talk about what it means to have an equitable and ambitious climate action so that we can all start working on this today with empathy and acknowledgement about our pandemic and our concurrent crisis. So how do we start? What does it mean to center inclusion, equity, and justice? Mr. Carlton, can you please bring some light to this subject?
Thank you so much, Vanessa, and I will do my best. To begin with, I think we have to understand that we're not able to get to an equitable climate solution if we don't address the inequities in our society. So ultimately, our environment is just one larger part of the social world in which we live. In the early days of the environmental movement, often the environment was seen as something separate from where people lived, as a place you go to go away from the cities, a place you go to go away from people. And that was viewed as the environment, the wilderness spaces, the untouched spaces. And that kind of romanticism-based environmentalism really excluded people who lived in cities, working class people, poor people, people of color, largely from participating and being part of that movement. And so as a result of that, a lot of environmentalism in the preservationist sphere as well as the conservationist sphere was really grounded in protecting and preserving those spaces that people who had leisure time and had wealth had the ability to go away to and enjoy. But what that meant was other spaces were often neglected and unprotected, right? And so spaces where people lived, where people worked, where people played, who weren't wealthy, who weren't white, who didn't have the ability to be able to go away, and who were locked into inner cities or locked into barrios, who were locked onto reservations, their environments were where they lived primarily. And we didn't really find that the movement was focused on these spaces and focused on this constituency and these people until more recently. As a result, when we think about an equitable climate solution, we've got to think about how to equitably deal with this social inequality and injustices that result from our history of gender, race, and class discrimination. And that kind of reality means that we have to envision a space where those are not present. As long as gender and race and class discrimination define people's experiences in our society, they will also define their experiences and relationship to the environment. And so that has to be a central part of really moving us forward to address an equitable climate vision. We can't fix this just by dealing with technology. This means we've got to deal with the technology of society, human beings dealing with one another in ways that are just, in ways that are equitable, in ways that are fair. And so to get to that point, one of the things that's required is for members of this audience to make sure that they are engaging as allies and as advocates for marginalized communities, for communities of color, for working class and low-income communities. If you're part of an organization or a church, or you're just an individual who's concerned about addressing climate change, then it's important for you to serve as an ally for those on the ground, community-based environmental justice organizations, social justice organizations that are fighting around issues of environmental justice. So becoming an ally in your community by connecting with organizations like the NAACP or the National Black Environmental Justice Network, right? Connecting with these organizations and their members on the ground to provide support and allyship, to advocate for people in your city who maybe live on the other side of town or live in neighborhoods that you've never been to, but are facing combined sewer overflows, who are dealing with heat island effects, who are dealing with the problems of air pollution that are concentrated where they live. Providing them with allyship and advocacy is a critical way to get us forward. As long as the people who are most at risk and most marginalized are neglected, we'll never really have an equitable climate solution. But if we begin by looking to those who are most threatened, like those in Flint and in other cities, like East Chicago, Indiana, when you look to those communities that are most threatened, most harmed, then you're going to find solutions that are going to allow everyone to be able to succeed.
Wow. So first, we make the intention to work across race and ethnicity, backgrounds, financial status, our different communities, our difference, and then we proactively seek ways to work together, listen, and collaborate. Thank you so much, Carlton. It was really insightful. And James, as I understand, you have been working for some time to apply the kind of guidance that Carlton just shared with us, this vision for equitable climate action. Can you talk to us a little bit about the work that you do and the way that people that are attending this seminar could get involved?
I'll be happy to, Vanessa. I'm going to talk about the vision for equitable climate action, and that was developed by 106 organizations within USCAN. It was consensus driven, and that means that everyone had to approve of this policy document before it was released. It consists of policy guidance, policy language and guidance for 9 sectors or topic areas that are impacted by or impacts the climate change world. And it also has some overarching sections that talks about just transition, some global issues, as well as geoengineering. And I will go to the next slide, please. The introduction of the document talks about the science. It goes into the roadblocks and then talks about the marginal communities or the injustices. The science comes from mainly the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which strongly suggests that if we continue on the current trajectory, that we would increase our temperature, our atmospheric temperature of more than 1.5 degrees C, which will result in hundreds of millions of people either suffering or dying early, and also catastrophic collapse of our ecosystems and our economies. The roadblocks that have been identified in this document talks about the monies that have been given to the political elected officials by the extractive industries. That includes fossil fuel industry and the wood products industry. And then that results in a lack of political will for those officials to address those issues, as well as fractured organizing. That is the piece that we have to address, that we need to be more cohesive there. And then the marginalized community section or the injustice section addresses that the people that are least responsible for the climate issues, that have the less resources to address those issues, and that will be on the front line when those issues hit, are the focus of what we are trying to accomplish here. The next slide, please. This document covers, again, number of sectors that are impacted or impacts the climate crisis. It includes reducing the greenhouse gas emissions, mainly carbon dioxide. It talks about protecting natural solutions, which are those solutions that actually draw the carbon from the atmosphere through their natural functions, such as forests, wetlands, and oceans, and sustainable agriculture. It talks about energy conservation and water conservation for buildings and infrastructure. It talks about green processes for industry, as well as phasing out fossil fuels, which we've been doing a good job at. And then lastly, it also talks about developing climate adaptation plans that are equity centered and that have the voices of those marginalized communities embedded in the policy language. Next slide, please. What we want to talk about is how you can get involved. We need advocacy for the VECA platform that we provided you with. And in the chat, there's some information about how you can do that through the action list, which is a list of things that whether you are a government official that makes decisions, whether you are an individual that just wants to be responsive, or whether you're an organization that this is your mission. So there are actions that you can do. You can also vote for people that will support or champion VECA, and that is an important element. Next slide, please. And now you wonder, how do you really get involved? Well, you can get involved. If you look at that diagram closely, it talks about getting under 1.5 degrees C. We can do that by using the VECA policy platform to hammer those officials, to let them know that we have the power, we have the solution, we know what we're talking about. You can go in and talk about any of the sectors, whether it's agriculture, whether it's natural solutions, whether it's energy efficiency. Excuse me for a moment. And then you can also go to, using that policy platform, you can encourage or elicit your grassroots organizations. And those grassroots organizations should be led or make sure that the marginalized communities are part of the decision-making of those efforts. And also you can participate in those local actions, regional actions, or national actions. And one of the national actions, and it has some regional appeal as well, is the Arm in Arm disruptive humanitarian effort that my colleague Lindsay Harvard is going to talk about to you a little bit later. And that is a good place in which you can use the VECA policy platform, again, to let those decision makers know that we have the power, we have the information, and these are things that you need to do. The last slide, please. We need your endorsement on VECA. There's a link in the chat that that provides a website that will show you how to do that. We also would like for you to support Arm in Arm or any of the local or regional activities that are going on in your area that you know of. The global initiatives is something that we need to stress as well. Even though we are not a signatory of the Paris Agreement, the standards that agreement put forth are still being applied by our local and state and federal government agencies. So we need to continue to do that. And we need to support those countries who are trying to support their marginalized communities from climate change. And they may not have the resources to do that. And they are one of those countries that have the least impact in terms of causing the climate crisis. Financing the pathway is going to be an issue that comes up. And what most regulatory actions require is a cost-benefit analysis, and those are projections. So we need to let the government officials know that the projected benefits of this policy platform far outweigh the costs. And then the last thing is just transition is a part of equity. And we need to make sure that those individuals who may lose their job, regardless of their race, regardless of whether or not they are fit into marginalized community, need to have a living wage to take care of their families. And at that, I will close. Thank you.
Thank you so much, James. I mean, there is a lot of packed information into that vision, and I truly appreciate you offering the insight into how it all came about. And it's a good way for everyone that is attending today to envision how they might be able to pursue similar efforts, or simply just as background for them to support BECA. And I want to share with you that Equal America has signed on to BECA and is promoting it in our network. Okay, now I want to ask you both a question. A lot of what the climate movement is pushing is for getting to 100% clean energy fast, making significant progress in the next 10 years. New conversations are emerging that are calling attention to the need to address historical emissions and climate reparations. Not only do we need to get very fast to 100% clean energy, but also, as our first session today discussed, we have to reverse our historical emissions, taking carbon out of the atmosphere, somewhat related to climate reparations. A rectification of the past and ongoing harm that climate pollution and change have done to many communities. I would like to know your thoughts about how this might influence our work toward equitable and ambitious climate solutions, and how they relate to the other crises that we face today. I would like to start with you, Carlton.
That's a big question, but it's a big and important question that we need to address. With regards to climate reparations, I might start off by saying that the United States historically is one of the biggest contributors by itself, probably largest historically of any contributor to climate problems at all, followed by Europe. When you put Europe and the United States together, you're kind of talking about 90% of the contributors to the greenhouse gases that we are now suffering the consequences from. In contrast, the rest of the world combined probably has contributed roughly 10%. On the other hand, in terms of consequences, people within those countries, right, marginalized communities within those countries that have gotten the least benefits out of that pollution are also going to suffer some of the greatest harms from that. And around the world, countries that have had very little, if any, contribution towards climate change are suffering some of its worst consequences. Climate reparations is really just calling for the equitable redress for the harm that has been caused historically, right? That's what it's about, making amends. In Flint, Michigan, we have an announcement today that Flint, Michigan or the residents of Flint, Michigan are going to be provided with a $600 million settlement from the state of Michigan as a result of the harm that was done to them from the decision made in Flint some years ago. This is just an example of how government has to take responsibility for its actions and be held accountable. Climate reparations is, I think, an important part of that and essential to bring about equity, right? We can do climate change and address climate change and make the people who had the least responsibility shoulder the greatest burden of harm and the cost. But that's just not right. It's not right. It's wrong. It's not just. It's unjust. It's not equitable at all, and it's unfair. And so as a result, climate reparations expects that countries pay to help other countries prepare for and deal with the problems of climate. I think climate reparations are essential and an important part of having an equitable climate vision.
Excellent take. Thank you so much, Carlton. What about you, James?
One of the arguments that you will hear from people, from decision makers, from theorists, is that climate reparations is hard to pinpoint who is actually to blame, and so who should we target the payment from. However, in our VICA document, we do recognize that, and I'm going to call it restitution. We do recognize that restitution can be and should be given, as Dr. Waterhouse has said. In that document, we talk about some particular restitution associated with the ag industry, minority farmers that may have been disproportionately excluded from monies or loans or things of that nature that will help them with their farms. We also have some building and energy efficiency language in there that provide restitution to those owners or people who live in those facilities that have maybe been part of a predatory loan situation. So we do address those issues. And it is our hope that the funds that are not given to the actual litigants or people, that they could go to directly help the communities, such as providing just transition to people that have lost their job, to providing funds for the community to address any health impacts, and any particular issues that will help give those particular communities access to the, say, forest if they were in an area that was deforested and things of that nature. So we do address those issues.
Well, that's so important. Thank you so much. There is so much that we can do and that we need to do to get to a just climate future. What should we expect along the way, and what is your guidance for this work for overcoming the challenges? Let's start with you, JC.
As I mentioned earlier, that organizations and coalitions, we should organize in a cohesive manner. We should plug into movements like Arm in Arm, and we should use the VICA platform and the policies that have been put out there to hold the elected officials accountable, and that we are knowledgeable and that we have the power and the at least the voting power and monies to address those issues that they should be addressing, and that we should be inclusive. We should make sure that the communities that are impacted, they're part of how we attack those particular issues, not only because it looks good to have them out front, but because they may have some things to say that are important and that make a difference. And yeah, I think that's about all I have to add to that.
Thank you, James. Carlton, what is your take on that?
So one of the things I'll add is that to get there, I think I want to go back to my earlier points about allyship and advocacy and make a distinction, right? So allyship is where you're working to elevate the voices of people who are otherwise not being heard and whose voices are coming from marginalized positions based on race, class, gender, or other identities. And so as a result of that, it's important for those who have privilege, that's a race privilege or a class privilege, to connect with those people who lack those same privileges to help their voices to be heard, to amplify their voices, not to replace them, right, but to amplify them. And so to get us there, we need to not only enter into collaborations and partnerships, but we also need to find people who are doing this work on the ground and need more support, need more financial support, need more support in terms of education, need more support in terms of resources, access, connections, right? And if we do that, what we're doing is we're not losing anything ourselves. In fact, we're expanding the size of our climate army, right? We're strengthening our base that's going to be able to make this kind of difference. And so I think that's really a key step for us to get there, is to find the people whose voices we can elevate. And almost all of us so many of us are in positions of privilege for whatever reason. We at the Howard University School of Law Environmental Justice Center look to work with communities to amplify their voices, to help to empower them to deal with environmental challenges that they face. We realize that we have that opportunity. We also have that responsibility. And if we all work together, arm in arm, even as the organization's name suggests, we will be able to get to this just climate future.
Wonderful. Here I have a question for the audience that I think it's so important. So it says, what is the best way for large organizations to collaborate with community groups led by African Americans and Latinos and minorities to implement more inclusive climate solutions? What would you say, James?
First of all, XIII is an organization in which I represent, and we are very diverse in terms of our membership, our focus, our profession, and we also are very diverse in terms of how we do our work internally, and diverse in terms of what we hold our signatures or people that become members of this organization, what we hold them accountable for. So from an organizational standpoint, that is something that is very important for us to be able to do. For individuals that would like to address issues associated with the environment, things of that nature, I would suggest plugging into the Sierra Club. The Sierra Club has a strong network of local state and national entities that will support environmental issues, access to nature, and the current trajectory that they're on now is addressing some of the white privilege issues and some of the other racial injustices that may have been associated with them in the past. So those are things I would suggest.
Yes, absolutely. Carlton?
I think big green organizations and the small ones too, in many ways, if they're going to be effective, they have to build meaningful, sustained relationships with these environmental justice grassroots organizations of color, just beginning and end. If they don't have meaningful relationships with these grassroots organizations where they are partnering, collaborating, and learning from, right? Helping to share resources with, they will always have a certain level of tone deafness because they're constantly in a position of moving outside of an important part of the constituency, right? If we don't broaden that environmental constituency that we had away from privileged white kind of male identity that it was its origin in the 1800s, if we don't get there today, we won't have the constituency we need to get the climate policies in place globally that are necessary to save everyone. This is not a luxury. This is not something that would be nice if you did it. This is essential. And making and building that kind of critical infrastructure for pipelining, for mentoring, for partnering is a critical part of environmental work. It's environmental. They may not see it that way, but that kind of relationship building builds the structures that are necessary for us to succeed in this work. So I would say absolutely find a local organization, find larger national organizations. There are so many that are out there. Adopt them, or I shouldn't say adopt them, find those that will work with you and work with them, not direct them, not tell them what they should do, but work with them and listen to them, become allies and advocates.
Well, that was amazing. Thank you so much, Carlton. You are absolutely right. As a Latina, a co-founder of a nonprofit organization, and that is precisely our feeling too. I mean, we definitely need to invite these communities to the table to create solutions all together. Because we are a community that is too large to be ignored. I mean, when we talk about minorities, African Americans, Latinos, the ones that are the most affected, we definitely need to work together to be part of the solution, to include these communities. Thank you so much for that. Another question from the audience. They are talking about the health, the faith, and how all these sectors interrelate. So how would you like to see work within and across these sectors to build a more equitable climate vision? James?
Could you repeat the last part of that?
So how could we work across sectors, like, for example, health, faith, and communities to build this just future that we are looking for?
Well, we can use the COVID-19 situation is really something that really strikes me right now in terms of health, and then all of the issues that have come up associated with that, with the marginalized communities being impacted, with people that have essential jobs but are not really making a lot of money, but they are being put on the forefront of being infected. I believe that what we're seeing now is a snapshot of what this world will look like if the climate issues are not addressed. And I think that there are a lot of things that need to be done. I think that there are a lot of things that we see now that we need to address. And I just believe everything that we're seeing now are things that we need to think about and put into play. And the VICA policy has a lot of the kinds of things that need to get done in order for things to go smoothly in the event of crisis. Of course, we don't want to project crisis, but we are looking at what a crisis looks like. And we are also seeing the desensitization that happens, so that we put on our TV sets and we see numbers of deaths and numbers of infection rising, and it seems to be no big deal. So we really need to figure that out, because we're on a trajectory where this is going to be commonplace, I think.
For sure. Carlton?
Yeah, I'm glad to see, and I know that this organization has done work in this area, religious communities coming out front to support some of these policies and some of these changes. I think that they're critical and a critical voice in our society. They have at times, not always, represented kind of a certain moral authority that has been able to provide leadership and guidance in difficult times, for example, during the civil rights movement. And I think that possibility still exists. I think that power still exists. But in many ways, sometimes religious communities have not spent the time looking at these issues through a realistic lens, to be very honest. And that's not a result of religion, but it's a result of ideology, an ideology that suggests that human beings don't have a role to play in these kind of big problems, and an inability to kind of recognize a moral and ethical responsibility for the environment in which we live. You know, earlier, not today as much, but earlier, a lot of theologians took a position that the earth was humans to be dominated. In fact, to use the right language, man's to dominate, right? To control, to use as man saw fit. I think today, this idea of stewardship and creation care really provide us with a different ethical, moral lens through which to see, well, if we want to go to a lot of our religious texts, we see, in fact, that there is a relationship that humans have to nature, and it's one of responsibility. It's not one of being able to just trample over willy-nilly. That would not be good leadership. That would not be good stewardship. So I'm calling on and hope that religious communities will raise their voice even louder around this issue to help provide real good moral and ethical guidance for people on such a critical part. And most of the world is religious. Let's be clear. As we go around the world to different countries around the world, religion is not the exception, it's the rule. And so if we can help people within Islam and Christianity, Buddhism and Judaism and other religions across the world, indigenous religions and beliefs and faith systems, to see how caring for the climate is such an important part and an ethical and moral responsibility. They provide just another group, coalition, battalion, right? Another group of persons to be engaged in this struggle and in this fight.
And I love that you bring that to the table, because it's so interesting to see how we have been evolving and changing. Definitely, I think that the vision now is that we are part of this beautiful Earth ecosystem, and we belong to the Earth, and we are all together in this, and we don't own anything. I mean, we're just there to share this beautiful existence with the animals and plants and the different ecosystems, and of course to protect it. That is our duty, our responsibility. Well, thank you so much for bringing that up. Okay, so the next questions. Our attendees are here because they want to act on climate, and they, of course, we want to provide them with tangible and ambitious and equitable ways to do so. Do you have recommendations on organizations or efforts that they should join today, or partnerships that they could do in order to be part of this transition? Carlton?
Yeah, I would say one, reach out to us at the Howard University School of Law Environmental Justice Center to talk about ways that we might partner and collaborate. But I also would direct people to organizations like We the People of Detroit that are doing so good work, such important work there in Detroit concerning water access and water justice issues. I want to talk about Black Millennials for Flint, an up-and-coming grassroots organization that has done really important and critical work around environmental justice, training and teaching new environmental leaders and advocating around environmental issues. I want to recommend the National Black Environmental Justice Network. If you go to their website, they have a listing of different organizations that do environmental justice work that you can contact and reach out to see how you might partner, collaborate, and support. And there are many other environmental justice networks that are out there. You can go on Google and you find indigenous organizations, you find Latinx organizations, you find other organizations that are out there. Reach out to them and say you want to support them, you want to be an ally, and what can you do to help?
Awesome, awesome. James?
Yes, as I mentioned before, the U.S. Climate Action Network, we have a number of organizations that are there that do a lot of good things. We have faith-based organizations. We have organizations that address natural solutions, and I would suggest that organizations, try to become a member of USCAN, and I love working with them. It provides a safe place for minorities to really talk about the issues and to address the issues. And again, I probably got the questions mixed up, but this is the Sierra Club is the next place that I would suggest that people who would like to address natural solutions. They have a number of places all around the country that addresses issues locally. They address national issues, and they're on the right trajectory now. So those are two places. And if you look into your I don't know, directories, there, as Carlton said, there are environmental justice programs or organizations that are creeping up everywhere. And I would go to your gosh, I forgot the name of that, your community business index or whatever it's called, business council, that would list all of the nonprofits. And that's where I started. I addressed my particular need to get involved through going to my civic center and finding out who were the environmental or climate justice or climate companies or NGOs around. And then I began to sort of work with them and follow them and figure out what they're about. So those are the things that if you don't have any tangible list of people, those would be sort of where I would start.
Wonderful. Yes, I mean, definitely. I think it's important to support your local communities, organizations, and that's a great point to begin. Of course, you can join Eco America. We have so many resources for you here, and follow our news and our talks and everything that we do. That is, I mean, it's truly amazing. Okay, so one last question. For all of us that are here listening today, and for the people that will watch this on demand starting Monday, what is the one thing that we can all do now, today, the one piece of advice that you will give ourselves to follow this path, looking for an equitable and just climate future? James?
I know you said one thing, but I'm gonna try to categorize, say one overarching thing with some things under it. I think for me, it's so important that I invest into the climate crisis or the climate change issues. And so I look at the things that I do and try to reduce my carbon footprint. I try not to buy single plastic bags or have at the grocery store have things put in single plastic bags. I try to get out and do more things outdoors without having to drive so much. And then I support greenways in my urban area. That is important for urban forestry. So those are the things that I can do that makes me feel like it's not a hopeless situation.
Wonderful. Yes, definitely. I mean, every effort has an important impact. Carlton, what would you say?
I would say learn about the environmental struggles of people who are not like you. Learn about the different environmental struggles by reading what has been written, by reaching out and listening to stories. Learn about the environmental struggles on people on small islands who are having to leave their home. Learn about the struggles that are being faced in Africa and Latin America and the global South. Learn about the struggles on our reservations and in Native communities, in Latinx communities and African American communities. Educate yourself so you know climate more than polar bears and more than threats to, more intense storms. Learn about heat islands, learn about the problems of flooding and displacement, learn about climate gentrification facing people in Miami and other coastal areas. And as you learn, then you will improve your ability to fight in this fight.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Carlton, and thank you, James, for everything that you do. You have given us a lot of work and a lot of a road that we can definitely follow. Thank you for everything that you are doing for justice and climate justice in America. Keep up the good work, and hopefully many more of us will be joining you to make this vision a reality. And for everyone that is participating, you can now endorse Becca yourself. The Eco America team has posted the link of endorsement form in the chat window, so you can just go ahead and endorse this wonderful effort. Thank you so much. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa.
Thank you. Now to our final session. Maggie, I think you're joining me.